Hi everyone, welcome back to another Planetarium live stream. My name is Jessica, I am the director of Planetarium, and with me I have one of my wonderful students who's going to help me out today, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student at UMD.
So tonight we're going to be talking about these things called Messier objects, and we'll tell you all about what they are, what types of objects, and then give you some good ones that we can find in the summer sky. Now, as we're going through, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Lindsay will be watching the comments and will let me know of any questions that come up. And if we don't get to them right away, we will take time at the end of the show to answer the questions we missed. So with that, let's get switched over to the presentation. And get going. Here we go. All right. So the very first thing we need to establish is, of course, what exactly these things called Messier objects are. And so you can see all of them right here in this beautiful picture. Messier objects are a set of 110 astronomical objects that are visible to observers in kind of the northern hemisphere. And these are, if you've ever heard of something referred to as like M13 or M45, they're talking about Messier objects and then whatever number it is. That's how they're determined. So there's M1 through M110 for our 110 Messier objects. Now what these things actually are some of the brightest deep sky objects that we can see in the sky. And a deep sky object is really something that's outside of our solar system. And so that encompasses a lot of different types of things, and we'll kind of go through the different categories. So these Messier objects are usually found on star charts. And so here's a really big star chart that shows you kind of where all of the objects are. And this can be very confusing and a little bit of intimidating if you don't know how to use a star chart, or maybe you're not as comfortable with it. And so what we're going to be doing as we talk about these objects is show you a smaller picture of kind of just the region around where the object is, and kind of teach you how to use those charts to help you locate these things in the nighttime sky. Now, some of these objects are visible to the naked eye, so you don't have to have a telescope or anything to be able to see them, and those are probably the best ones to start with because you can just see them with your eye. But many of these you do need something else to help you, but not anything super powerful, like a very small telescope, like a 4-inch telescope, or even a pair of binoculars, like a regular pair of binoculars, can let you see these things. But they're, I guess I would say, a step above finding the naked eye ones, because you are going to have to know kind of how to jump from stars that you can see to point your telescope or binoculars where these objects are. But again, we're going to give you all of the tips and tricks to help you do this. So the reason they are called Messier objects is because they are named after the French astronomer Charles Messier. Now, he was actually not interested in these objects. He was actually interested in looking for comets. But as he was searching for comets, he kept finding these other things that weren't comets, and therefore frustrated him because they kept not necessarily misleading him, but getting in his way. And so in order to stop being confused or mistaken by these non-comet objects, he decided to make a list of all of these objects and where they were, so that he knew that he'd already seen this and it wasn't a comet. And so that's where these Messier objects started off. Now, his first version of this catalog was published in 1774 and contained only 45 objects. And most of these were objects that were not new, were not discovered by Messier. They had been discovered previously. But he did find 18 new ones that went on this list. By 1784, so 10 years later, he and his assistant, so Messier is on the left, and his assistant, who is, do I not have his name written down? Oh, Pierre Michon. I do not speak French, so I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly. His assistant, Pierre, is on the right. After 10 years, they increased this list from 45 to 103. And then over the years, other astronomers using Messier's notes found about 7 more, giving us our total 110 objects that are in the Messier catalog today. And these are typically pretty famous objects. These are things that most amateur astronomers try to look at through their telescopes. They're also very, very well studied by professional astronomers because these are very close objects, and so they're a good way for us to study these different types of objects in the universe. And so these tend to be pretty well known. So you may have heard of quite a few of these that we're going to talk about. All right, so as I said, these Messier objects are a lot of different types of objects that we can see in our universe. One type of object are what we call star clusters, which are just groups of stars, and those come in 2 types. So what we're seeing right now is what we call an open star cluster. This is a group of a few thousand or so stars that are very loosely gravitationally bound together. They typically are bluer in color because what we're seeing is actually a very young group of stars. And so this blue color comes from these big, bright, hot blue stars that don't have very long lives. And so usually we only see them in areas where we have very recent new star formation, just because they don't live for long. But they're so bright that they dominate the color coming from this group. So the most famous of the open clusters is Pleiades, M45. And Pleiades can be seen up in the winter sky, and it is in the constellation of Taurus the Bull. And so, as I was saying, we have kind of a smaller piece of this star chart to kind of help give you an idea of how to read this and how to use this. And so we can see this V that is the head of Taurus the Bull. And so if you want to find Pleiades, you just have to go from that V kind of up and to the right a little bit. Now, Pleiades is one of the things that you can see naked eye. It is incredibly bright, so you can easily see it no problem. And so you've honestly probably seen it even if you didn't realize it. Another thing I want to point out is a lot of the pictures that we're going to start off showing you are the very highly detailed pictures that were taken by looking at an object for a long time and aren't necessarily representative of how they will look to your eye. Now, a little bit later, I'll show you what some of these would look like to your eye. And that's kind of important to keep in mind because we have all of these really fanciful pictures kind of in our head, and a lot of people can be disappointed when they see it for themselves because they don't realize the pictures they're used to seeing are actually hours and hours and hours of staring at this object, collecting light, allowing you to see all of that detail. And our eyes just can't do that. But anyway, back to the objects. So this is the classic open star cluster of the Pleiades. Now, I did say that there are 2 types of clusters. The other are what we call globular clusters. They are much bigger than open clusters and contain a lot more stars, hundreds of thousands of stars that are all packed together, tightly bound by gravity, and they make this just big, tight ball of stars, a glob of stars, hence the globular cluster. Now you may notice that this globular cluster has more of a reddish hint to it than our Pleiades open cluster, which was a very bright blue. And that's because globular clusters tend to be older populations of stars. So those really bright blue stars have lived and died, and they're not there anymore. And all that's left are smaller, cooler, redder stars. And since that's the type of star that's around, that's what's going to dominate the color coming from this globular cluster. Now, the globular cluster we're looking at right here is known as M2, and it does not have a fancy name. I've given another of its catalog names in GC 7089, which definitely doesn't sound as great as Pleiades. But some of these objects don't have, the fancy names. And this is a globular cluster that can be found in the constellation of Aquarius. So Aquarius is the water bearer. And so you can find him up, this is the fall sky, right, Lindsay? I'm going to assume. Okay. I was trying to remember Capricorn, which is fall. Yeah, I remember. So Capricorn is this kind of like triangle that's in the sky. And so if you find this triangle of where Capricorn is and kind of go up from it, we can find where M2 is. So yeah, what else was I going to say? Oh, this object is one of the few that could be seen with your naked eye, but you have to have really, really, really dark skies to be able to see it. All right, so moving on from star clusters, another type of object that we can see are nebulae, or a nebula, which is a big gas cloud. And there are a couple of different types of these gas clouds in space. One type is known as a star-forming region, or an H2 region. And they're called this because it is a giant, dense cloud of mostly hydrogen that is actively forming stars, which is why it's a star-forming region, or a stellar nursery. And these contain thousands and thousands and thousands of stars worth of gas within them. So they are just huge, enormous clouds. The most famous is M42, the Orion Nebula, named so because it is in the constellation of Orion. So Orion, of course, is most famous for, or most easily found by the 3 belt stars. And this nebula actually sits below that in the sword. The middle, what looks to us sometimes as a star in the sword, is actually this gas cloud, this Orion Nebula. And so here we have in the middle one of those more detailed pictures that we can take from looking at it for a very long time. And then on the far left is a little bit closer to what you might actually see. So you don't see as much structure, you don't see as much color, and that's just because of our eyes. We don't capture a lot of information in the split second that our brain processes the light coming in. And this is another bright object. You could see this one with your naked eye with decently dark skies. You'll see this little fuzzy little dot in the middle of the sword, and that is the Orion Nebula. And it is, I would say, my favorite deep sky object to look at through a telescope, because it is still absolutely gorgeous. All right, another type of nebula is what we call a planetary nebula. And this is formed when a star like our sun, so similar in size and stuff to our sun, dies. What happens is at the end of its life, it kind of puffs up and gently blows away its outer layers. And so that leaves behind this like spherical-ish cloud of gas that was blown away from the star. And at the very center, you're left with kind of the dead core of the star that's called a white dwarf. And so the very classic planetary nebula that we're seeing here is M57, the Ring Nebula. And so you get a really good kind of look at that cloud of gas that's been puffed away as the star died. Now, the name planetary in planetary nebula is actually misnomer. It has nothing to do with planets. This kind of name came from when we first started seeing these things through telescopes. They were these little circles of color that resembled what a planet looks like through a telescope, and that's how it got their name. So it's a cloud of gas that appeared the same as planets do, but it actually has nothing to do with planets. And so the Ring Nebula, you can see, it is one that you can see up in the summer sky in the constellation of Lyra, which has the really bright star Vega in it. And so it is right smack kind of in the bottom section of Lyra, in between the bottom two stars that make up the harp of Lyra. Now I have this one here because this one is a little bit more difficult to find because it is pretty faint. And so I'll show you another example later that's a little bit easier to see in the summer sky. All right, our last type of nebula is a supernova remnant. So this is what happens to stars that are much bigger than our sun. When they reach the end of their life, instead of kind of gently blowing away the outer layers, they explode in a giant, massive, energetic event we call a supernova. And so what we see in a supernova remnant is the gas that was exploded out into space from this supernova event. And so they tend to have a lot more structure to it. They tend to be a bit more chaotic, as you can see here with the very classic M1 Crab Nebula. Now, the Crab Nebula is actually really, really interesting for quite a few reasons, one of which is astronomers on Earth saw the supernova that created the supernova remnant. So this supernova happened back in 1054 and was seen by Chinese astronomers. We have their information that they wrote down all about seeing this kind of guest star or new star appear in the sky for a short time, which was that burst of light from the supernova that eventually faded back away. So it's kind of cool that we can study the gas cloud left behind from a supernova that we actually saw happen. So the Crab Nebula is also in the constellation of Taurus. It's actually up by one of his horns. And so if you take that V and you extend it out, you end up getting two horns coming off of the head of Taurus. And so our Crab Nebula sits right next to the left horn. All right. Now the last type of object that comprises the Messier objects are galaxies. But it's really interesting to know that when we first started seeing these objects, we didn't actually know that these were galaxies, because at the time, we didn't know how big the universe actually was. We thought that our Milky Way was the extent of the universe. And so when these things were found, they were actually called nebulae, because they looked like those gas clouds. It wasn't until a while later that we learned how to figure out the distance to these objects and learned the size of our galaxy that we were able to piece these pieces of puzzle together and figure out that these are actually way, 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 way further away than we thought, outside of our own galaxy and our galaxies in and of themselves, which is just kind of fascinating how our understanding has really evolved and changed. So galaxies come in a couple different types. The two main ones we're going to show you, the first is a spiral galaxy. Our galaxy is a spiral galaxy. It's basically a disk shape with spiral arms, and you can often see those beautiful spiral arms. They tend to, again, have a bluer color because they're actively forming stars. Now, what we're seeing here with M33, the Triangulum galaxy, this is actually one of the three larger galaxies that is in our local group of galaxies. So the kind of 60 or 70 so galaxies in our region of space. There are three big ones, Andromeda, the Milky Way, and Triangulum being the smallest of the three. And so we can find Triangulum in the constellation. This is the wrong picture, isn't it, Lindsay? I put the wrong one up. Oh, nope, there he is. There's Triangulum and M33. So it's kind of near Andromeda. Triangulum, it is a triangle found in the fall sky, and so M33 is off from that. Now, the other type of a galaxy is an elliptical galaxy, and these kind of resemble the globular clusters, but they're just galaxy-sized. And so contain, hundreds of millions to billions of stars rather than, tens to hundreds of thousands. So they're kind of roughly spherical, maybe slightly elongated in shape, kind of globs of stars that also have a reddish appearance because it's usually older stars. One of the most classic examples is showing here M87. This is maybe not the best one to showcase elliptical galaxies because this one is slightly unusual. It is the largest galaxy that we have found in our universe. I believe it still holds that title. If it's not the largest anymore, it's definitely up there. So it's a huge, huge galaxy. It's a little bit unusual because it does have this jet of material coming out, but that's because there's a big active black hole at the center. And if you happen to see the announcement, has it been a year already? It's been about a year since we I saw the announcement about a year ago, the first ever picture taken of a black hole. That picture is of the supermassive black hole at the center of M87, which is kind of why I wanted to show it, because it's just really cool. And this sits in the constellation of Virgo, which we can see in the spring sky. And you can see here that Virgo actually has a lot of galaxies in it. This is actually a cluster of galaxies known as the Virgo cluster. So there's lots of good things to see in that area of the sky. All right. So those are the different types of objects. The Messier objects, different ones, can be seen throughout the year at different times of the year and different seasons. So with us being in the summer season, I wanted to showcase a few really good ones if you were interested in going out this summer and trying to find some of these for yourself. So the very first one I want to tell you about is the Hercules, or the Great Globular Cluster in Hercules. This is, I would say, one of the more famous globular clusters. It is fairly easy to see. In fact, if you have really, really dark skies, you can see it with your naked eye. And it sits in the constellation of Hercules. And so if you've seen our star shows in the past, you may know this trick already of how to find Hercules. But you can use the crown, Corona Borealis, to help you find Hercules. By turning this crown into a spoon, the stars that you add on for the handle of the spoon are actually two of the stars in Hercules. They're his belt stars. And so then you can find Hercules in the sky. And the Great Globular Cluster sits right here in between these two stars, which are pretty bright and really easy to see. Now, this is where I've tried to find pictures that would better show what these objects would look like to you through a small telescope. And so what we're seeing here is how this looks through a 3-inch telescope, which is a reasonably small telescope. And you can still see that kind of concentration of stars and some little dots around it of individual stars. Now, if you wanted to really see that central region and really see the individual stars in there, you are going to need a bigger telescope. But even through a very small one, you get a great view of this globular cluster. All right, the next thing to find in the summer sky is a planetary nebula, M27, the Dumbbell Nebula. So this, you can see right here, is given its name because it has this kind of hourglass or dumbbell shape to it. And it is right in the middle of the summer triangle. And so the summer triangle is these three bright stars in a triangle shape that you can find up in the summer sky. We have Vega, which if you remember the Ring Nebula is right there in Vega. We have Vega, Deneb, and Altair, which make up our summer triangle. And so right in between Altair and Deneb, a little bit closer to Altair is where you can find the Dumbbell Nebula. So if you can find these two stars and then make a line from one to the other, you should come across where the Dumbbell Nebula is. All right. Now, in the constellation of Sagittarius, which is up in the south in the summer sky, there are a couple of really great objects there as well. The first is M8, which is the Lagoon Nebula, which is right here. And it's viewed through a kind of smallish telescope. So this is a star-forming region, a lot like the Orion Nebula. And this is another one that, with really, really, really dark skies, you may actually be able to see with your naked eye. But what's really cool about this region of the sky near Sagittarius is we're actually looking into the heart of our galaxy. And so you can see that there are a lot of things, a lot of gas clouds, a lot of nebulae and other objects in this region of the sky because we're looking directly into our galaxy and there's just a lot of stuff to see. So this is an area that's super great and super rich with lots of awesome objects to look at. Now, right above the Lagoon Nebula sits the Trifid Nebula, which is this beautiful kind of multi-toned, two-toned gas cloud that actually also has an open cluster of stars that's situated inside of it, because again, this is another of those star-forming regions where we have active star formations. We have this group of young stars that have just formed. Now, unfortunately, this is not the view you would actually get to your eye through a telescope. This is a view that was taken over a few hours. And so when you look at it with just your eye, you will see the kind of cloudiness, but the colors won't be as vivid. And that's just an unfortunate side effect of, looking with your eye instead of a camera. But this is the best I could find to try and simulate what it would look like. And then our very last object for the summer sky is the Andromeda Galaxy. Now this is the other big galaxy that's in our local group. The Andromeda Galaxy is actually bigger than the Milky Way and sits in the constellation of Andromeda. That's where its name came from. And the easiest way to find it is to look for Cassiopeia, the Queen, which is this big W in the sky. And then this portion of the W actually acts like an arrow that will point you straight to the fuzzy patch that is the Andromeda Galaxy. And this is a very bright object. You can most definitely see this with your naked eye. You do not have to have a telescope to see this. In fact, it is the only thing that sits outside of our galaxy that we can see with our naked eye here in the Northern Hemisphere. And it's just kind of mind-boggling that we can see an entirely separate galaxy with just our eyes. Now, even with a small telescope, that's going to look a little bit better. You'll be able to see it in a bit more detail. It won't be just this faint, fuzzy patch. But yeah, and this is, I would say, one of the most classic deep sky objects to look at in the kind of summer and fall sky. All right, now a couple of other tips to give you. You'll notice that throughout this we used a couple of different things. We started out using those type of star charts that have the constellations and some of the brighter stars named, and then have the location of the object in reference to that. We also did something similar for our summer sky objects, but this uses a program called Stellarium to do that same thing. And so these are a couple of really great tools to help you figure out where to look. If you're comfortable reading a star chart, you can always use that. You can use a program like Stellarium, which I do have linked in the description of this video, to help you figure out where things are going to be. But another great resource is just your phone. So let me pull up my camera again real quick. Okay, so on your phone you can get these sky apps that will use your GPS, and based off of where you point your phone, it'll show you what you're seeing up in the sky. And so this is a really great way, especially if you're just learning things like constellations and stars, to use the app so that you can point and go, okay, yeah, that bright star is Vega, so those are the stars in Lyra, and so the Ring Nebula should be about there, and give you a better idea of where to look. I think this is a great resource. I still use it myself because I don't know all the star names yet. It's just, I haven't learned them all yet. And yeah, those are the Messier objects. You can see, like I was saying, you can see all year round there are some in the sky. I know that in a time period, I think it's in March, for certain latitudes, there is actually a short span of time that you could see all 110 objects in one night. And some amateur astronomer groups will actually get together and have Messier parties, where they do this over the course of a night. They try to see all 110. I think it's fantastic. Would love to do that one time. But yeah, so I think that about wraps it up.
The Messier Marathon.
Yes. I think it would be a lot of fun.
If you have somebody, sign off that you saw all of them.
Oh, really? Oh, that's really cool. Lindsay, do you have anything to add, or?
We don't have any questions. Let's see. My favorite Messier object is M13, that globular cluster that we looked at. I have seen that naked eye in really dark skies in Utah. And also, it's just so pretty in the telescope, seeing all of those stars.
It glimmers kind of like a jewel.
Yeah, it's
it's really pretty. Yeah. All right, well, if you do have any questions, now is a great time to put them down in the comments. While we wait and see if any come in, I have a couple of things I want to remind you guys about or tell you about for the first time. So we are just about to wrap up our giveaway for our sparkly dino. This is just like Trimmer, who is the dino that went up with the Crew Dragon astronauts up to the International Space Station. He's currently hanging out in the ISS with the astronauts right now. And we have 2 of these that we'd like to give away to you guys. And so the website is there. It's also linked in the description for this video. Basically, what we want you to do is draw a mission patch, which is just really whatever you want it to be. You can check our Facebook page. We posted some examples, and they don't have to be anything fancy or crazy. Just something fun, colorful, whatever you want it to be. But draw one and send it to us, and you will be entered to win one of these sparkly dinos, and we have 2 of them to give away, and we'll be doing that drawing on Wednesday, so a few days from now. So if you want a chance to win, definitely get that in soon. And then the other thing that we very recently announced is we are hosting virtual summer camps in July. So July 13th through 17th, we'll be holding our Adventure Through the Solar System virtual camp. And then July 20th through the 24th, we'll be exploring alien worlds. I have a link to where you can find more information about these camps in the description for the video. And registration for these camps will go live on Monday, and that will be open until from June 29th to I think it's July 10th. We will have registration open for these camps. So yeah, a lot of fun stuff going on this summer with us. Anything come in?
No.
No? All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Next week, we will, on Wednesday, be doing our monthly What You Can Find Up This Month in the Sky. We'll also be doing our drawing for the giveaway for our 2 dinos. And then next Saturday, we are not going to have a show since it is the 4th of July. We are going to take the night off to celebrate with family, safely quarantined, so need to be safe out there. But yeah, then we'll be back the next week with our regular Wednesday, Saturday schedule. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope to see you again. You can find any of our past videos on our YouTube channel or in the video section of our Facebook page. So yeah, we hope you all have a great night and a great rest of your weekend, and we will see you next week. Bye!